All right. So in the last video, we talked about the procedure that we're going to follow to use grouping when we're trying to factor a polynomial that only has 3 terms. In this video, we're just going to do a handful of examples of how to work through that process, just so you can see it a few more times. We're also going to take a look at least one, maybe 2 examples where we're not dealing with all positive signs, which is what we've seen so far. As a quick side note, just so you know, in this particular set of videos and the homework problems that go with them, all of these problems, the term in the middle, the term that we're trying to break apart, the term that we're trying to uncombine, that particular term is always going to be positive right now. In the next set of videos and the next set of practice problems that we're going to have after this, we'll deal with the situation. Well, what if that thing's negative, and how do we handle that? Okay, just so you know that, so that so you don't feel like that I'm jipping you out or I'm not going over certain things. We're going to focus right now on just a positive middle term, and then we'll look at situation where the middle term is negative and any other thing that might happen with signs in later videos. Okay, so with that said, let's take a look at our learning objectives and let's get started. Since this is just the review, or I'm sorry, the practice problem video, our learning objective hasn't changed. Our goal is to be able to factor polynomials that have 3 terms. So that's the same learning objective we had in the last video. And we're still going to be using this same basic process of first uncombine the middle term using these 3 steps, and then use grouping with these 3 steps. So that basic process is not going to change. In fact, I'm just going to set this right to the side so that we've got that there and available to look at as we consider our next problem. Okay, so in this problem, what we're going to do is we're going to factor using the method of grouping 3x squared plus 10x plus 8. So I guess this is the first example of this particular video. If you want to keep counting from the last video, then this would be example number 2. But there we go. We're going to factor that thing. So as we said last time, the first thing we want to do is take the middle term and we want to uncombine it. And the way that we do that is by multiplying the first and the last number, the leading coefficient and the constant. So the 3 and the 8. Okay, so with that as just a little bit of a reminder, if you feel like having that one example from the last video was enough, maybe pause this right now and see if you can work through these 3 steps. I would not do the whole thing quite yet. Make sure that you've got the first 3 steps right, and then resume the video, check it with me. If you've got that right, then you can pause the video again and finish it, okay? But let's try this. Okay, so hopefully you've tried doing this. So hopefully you started off to the side or on scratch paper or something by multiplying the leading coefficient and the constant together. And then we need all the factor pairs of 24. So just as a reminder, 24 has kind of a lot. If that's something that you can do off the top of your head, not a problem. But don't forget that we've got this website that can find factor pairs for us. So if I say, hey, find the factor pairs of 24, Mr. Wolfram Alpha, here there are. There's 4 of them all together. 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6. Okay, now from that list, I need to pick specifically the pair that will add, because this is a plus sign, right? I'm looking at this sign right here to make my decision, that will add to equal this number. Okay, now this right here is the only sign I care about, the fact that it's an add. Everything else I just treat like it's a positive. So all of these factor pairs that we just found using Wolfram Alpha, we treat all of those like they're positive numbers. Okay, we don't worry about anything possibly being negative. The 10, we treat it like it's positive. Everything is positive. This is the only sign we care about. Okay, so which pair from this list will add to equal 10? Well, I think that's 6 plus 4, right? 4 plus 6, that equals 10. So now that I've picked my pair, I'm going to take this 10x and I'm going to uncombine it by breaking it back up into a 4x plus a 6x. And like I mentioned in the last video, it doesn't matter what order you write those in, 4x, 6x, or 6x, 4x. you're going to get the same answer in the end. It's just the step in the middle is going to look a little bit different depending on which order you write them in. Okay, so this thing stays the same, this thing stays the same, the middle term gets uncombined. So now I've undone that process of combining like terms. So hopefully you ended up with something like this after you tried it. Now we're going to move into grouping. So again, make sure you have this result right now. Pause the video and try to finish the problem out from here. All right, so hopefully you paused the video and you started by splitting this into two groups. So there's my two groups, and finding the greatest common factor of each of those two groups. So in my first group, the greatest common factor is just an X. And if I factor an X out of this, or if I think about what was the X distributed to, whichever way you prefer to think of it, in the first spot, X times what equals 3X squared? Well, that would have to be an X times 3X to get 3X squared. Plus sign in the middle. X times what equals 4X? Well, that would have to be an X times 4 in order to get 4X. So there's my first parentheses. Now I'm going to use the little trick that we talked about when we learned grouping. My parentheses have to match. So if this was a 3X plus 4, then this must also be a 3X plus 4. So what number went out in front here? Well, a positive 8 divided by a positive 4 is equal to 2. So this must have been a 2, and then I can check that. Does 2 times 3X equal 6X? Yes, it does. So that's the correct number to put there. All right, so I'm done now with step 2. I move on to step 3. My super greatest common factor, my super GCF, is that great big giant thing in those parentheses. So I'm going to undistribute that thing and rewrite my 3X plus 4. And then make a new set of parentheses where I write down the stuff that this got distributed to. I hope no English teachers are watching this, because boy, do I have bad grammar, but that's okay. What did I distribute this to multiply by here in the parentheses? Well, this thing is being multiplied by an X in the front, so that must be an X. And this thing is being multiplied by a 2 in the back, so that must be a 2. And so there's my answer. All right, so that's our second example. I went through that a little bit faster because it was fairly similar to what we had in the last problem, where everything was a plus sign, and we're going through those same basic steps. Okay, on this next example, I'm going to switch it up by changing that last sign on us. Okay, now like I said, right now at this point in our class, the sign in the middle is going to stay a positive. That's going to change eventually. But for right now, this sign right here in the middle is going to stay a positive. But the sign at the end, that one I'm going to switch to a negative for right now. Okay. Now, if you feel like you're comfortable, go ahead and try working through this. Again, I would recommend maybe just do the first 3 steps to uncombine the middle term, and then resume the video to see if we get the same answer for that middle part. As long as we get the same answer, then you can pause the video and go from there. All right, so pause the video right now and try these 3 steps. All right, hopefully you tried the first 3 steps. And so hopefully you recognize I'm going to begin by multiplying the 2 and the 9. As I've said, I'm treating everything like it's positive. So I'm just going to do a 2 times a 9. I don't care that it's a negative 9. 2 times 9 is 18. Now I'm going to write down all the factor pairs of 18. So there's 1 times 18, there's 2 times 9, and there's 3 times 6. I treat all of those like they're positive. I don't care about negatives yet. Okay. Now I'm going to pick the factor pair. Here's the only sign that I care about. I'm going to pick the factor pair that subtracts to equal a 3. Okay, so right now that's the only sign that I care about, is I want to find the factor pair that subtracts to equal this number right here, which is a 3. Okay, well, that's got to be 6 minus 3, right? That's the only ones that subtract to give me the 3. Remember, we've got to pick them in pairs. So I cannot do like 9 minus 6, because that's not a pair that goes together. It's got to be one of these pairs. 6 minus 3 is the only one that gives me a 3 here. Okay, so I need this to be a positive 3. Now here's where I start caring about the sign a little bit. It needs to be a positive 3, so that means I must have done 6 minus 3, right? Because if I did 3 minus 6, I would have gotten a negative. So this is the part where we start to care about the signs a little bit. In next video, in the next topic, when we start switching this sign around and making this sometimes positive and sometimes negative, we're going to develop this idea more fully then. But for right now, I hope that we would all agree that if I do a 6x minus a 3x, that combining these like terms would create a 3x. So therefore, the uncombining process, I'm turning the 3x into a positive 6 minus 3, a positive 6x minus 3x. Okay, so that's my first 3 steps. The rest of this stays the same, right? I've got a minus 9 at the end, and I've got a positive 2x squared at the beginning. Okay, the 6x is positive, so I'm putting a plus sign there also. All right, so there we go. That's our first 3 steps. Make sure you've got that. Make sure you understand why it is the way it is. Then pause the video and try to finish out by doing the grouping. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and you've done your grouping, and hopefully you started by splitting this up into 2 groups. And when you did this, hopefully you remembered, and this is going to be one of the key parts, hopefully you remembered that when you split it into 2 groups, that I need to have a plus sign in the middle. So I'm going to think of this as being plus a negative 3x. I'm going to keep the negative as part of this group right here. I'm going to put a plus sign in the middle. If you did not do that, you might want to make that correction, pause the video and try to correct your mistake. And let's see what happens. Okay, so from the first group, my greatest common factor is going to be a 2x, right? Because 2 and 6 can both be divided by 2. They both have x's. My smallest exponent is this ninja 1. So 2x is my greatest common factor. To what did I distribute the 2x? Well, it must have been something with 2 terms and a plus sign in the middle. Okay, so that must have been my basic structure. The first term was something that when I multiply by 2x, I get 2x squared. Well, I only need a ninja 1. 2 times 1 equals 2. And then x times another x would give me an x squared. So this must have been a 1x. And I'll just keep the 1 as a ninja. So that was a 1x. Okay, for the other spot, what times 2x equals 6x? Well, 2 times 3 equals 6. And I already have an x, so it must have just been a 3. I didn't need another 3. So there's that piece. Okay, plus sign comes down in the middle. Now for this part, I'm going to use the trick that says the stuff in parentheses has to be the same. And then to figure out what goes out in front here, I'm just going to divide. Negative 9 divided by positive 3 is equal to a negative 3. And now I can check and make sure if I distribute a negative 3, do I get the right answer? And I do. So negative 3 is the correct number to put there. All right, so now I'm done with step 2. I've done the greatest common factor from both groups. And I move on to step 3. Let's take out this super greatest common factor. Let's undistribute that. Let's factor that out. So I've got an x plus 3 factored out. And then I put a set of parentheses and figure out, okay, what was in those parentheses? So from this first piece, the x plus 3 is getting multiplied by a 2x. And then in this second piece, the x plus 3 is getting multiplied by a negative 3. Okay, if you want to write plus a negative 3, that's fine. At this point, because we're talking about our final answer, I would go ahead and switch it back to being minus 3, but you can write it either way, and that would still be correct. So there is our final answer. And of course, you can always check it by distributing and simplifying it and making sure that this is the polynomial you would get when you're done multiplying. All right, so there's a couple of examples that we can use One more example where all the signs were positive. One example where we switched this to a negative, and we talked about how that plays out with that minus sign there, okay? But for all of them, we're still following these basic 3 steps for grouping, and we've added on to them these 3 steps for uncombining the middle term. All right, so hopefully that helps, gets you through a couple more problems. Go ahead and do your practice problems after this. And then in the next set of videos, we're going to continue to work with grouping that has 3 terms, but we're going to start playing with the signs and doing a little bit more as far as what other types of scenarios might you see or might have to deal with. All right, thanks for watching this video. Have a good one.